Alright, as many of you know, I'm extremely passionate about game preservation, and because of that, I created an entire YouTube channel dedicated to that very idea called Retro Rebound. It's over there we focus on retrospectives, unboxings, first-time playthroughs of classic video games that I never got a chance to get my hands on, and all of this is designed around one idea: celebrating an era of video games that myself and many others believe was the best time to be a gamer. The reason for that is because it felt like the creator was in the driver's seat. And as we've progressed into the digital age of gaming, there is still a lot of creative energy in our industry in many pockets, particularly the indie space. However, as gaming has grown, we've also seen the contamination of the creative process because it's become more and more of a business model. So with that, a lot of you had sent me what's happening with Ubisoft as of lately. And to me, it's just a touchstone to a much more broad conversation I'd like to have today. It's not the first time I've sat down to talk about the digital age of gaming, but let's just call it as it is. As the video title says, gaming's getting worse. Yes, there are a lot of positive benefits like cloud technology, being able to stream games to your phone, Game Pass, so on and so forth. You can list them out for me on why gaming has got better as it's grown. But there's also been a lot of things left in the past that never should have been left in the past, and one of those things is video game ownership. The idea that when you pay for something, it is yours, and why it's become more and more just a rental, a long-term rental, if anything at all. And we're going to break that down with many examples far beyond Ubisoft, but let's cover that first because that's really, again, the touchstone that begins this conversation. So what's happened with Ubisoft, as I'm sure many of you have heard, is that they're taking down a lot of their DLC and online servers for over a dozen video games, some popular ones too, like Splinter Cell Blacklist, the old Assassin's Creed multiplayer, so on and so forth, because they're claiming no one's playing these games, so we're not going to waste our resources keeping those alive. We're going to focus on the newer ones. At face value, and I'm guilty of saying, okay, big deal, yeah, they're dead video games, so why not? Who cares? And moved on. But then you quickly realize that this is just the beginning of a cycle that will repeat again and again and again across many other publishers. What we're going to start to see is what's the standard going to be in 2032 when this year's big multiplayer game from Ubisoft is a decade old? Are you just going to close down the servers and that's it? No other options, nothing at all. And maybe none of these IP matter to you. I get it. Assassin's Creed, Tom Clancy, Watch Dogs, so on and so forth. These are probably things you're already familiar with. You're okay letting them go. But I also look towards the future. I look at what Ubisoft is currently working on, particularly one of my favorite franchises ever, next to Fallout, being Star Wars. They're making a Star Wars game. I would like my Star Wars games to be preserved. So to me, when they are shutting things down willy-nilly, removing the sale potentially of other games, I worry about the future of a game I'm going to care about, whether it's good or bad. So to me, I feel like a precedent's being set that's kind of dangerous across many companies that we'll focus on today, and where the near miss occurred, but it hasn't been a near miss in other instances, is where we saw Assassin's Creed Liberation potentially becoming unplayable over on Steam, where Ubisoft was taking down a multitude of games, their DLC, their support, all of that stuff, and they ended up apparently targeting Assassin's Creed Liberation, where it was going to be unplayable after September of this year. Now, Ubisoft walked it back real quick and said, no, that's not the case here. And you could tell, like, they were going in one direction and quickly, whoop, went the other way. And that's the problem, right? The fact that they were even heading down a certain path of revoking access from a game. I don't know what these companies don't seem to understand about the idea of customers wanting to buy something and owning it. And it was at the point where we were this close with Assassin's Creed Liberation to being a owner of a game. It's in your library. You couldn't download it and you couldn't play it. And to me, it blows my mind that any company feels they got the right to, when you've paid for something, to take it away from you and make it inaccessible. I understand there's a gray area with multiplayer, but with a game like Assassin's Creed Liberation, which is a single-player Assassin's Creed game, what? So that's where it all begins, right? What's happening with Ubisoft. And I think what happened with Assassin's Creed Liberation was what I'd call a near miss. However, there's been many instances where there wasn't a near miss, where games have been taken off the marketplace and have not come back. Popular ones at that, some games not so good, but I'm going to dive deeper into that and why that's very much the case in this industry. So let's start off with some more examples, right? Metal Gear Solid. So there was the HD collection, right, with 2 and 3. Turns out there's some historic videos within these games that now Konami needs to renew the license, the rights to use them, And so these games are taken off the digital storefront. What happens now is the physical price for these games across all retailers, whether it be eBay or just your local game shop, will shoot up the price because now you can't access it digitally. There's no alternative. You can only play the game physically. And because you can only play the game physically, those prices are going to skyrocket, and we have to wait until maybe, if at all, in this case, Metal Gear Solid HD Collection comes back in a digital format. And it's why preservation and moving games forward is so important. A lot of people wondered, why was my hype so strong for Mass Effect Legendary Edition? Of course, it was the excitement of Mass Effect. I love the franchise, but it was also the idea of creating an all-in-one package after they had done individual games and a trilogy to say, here is this printed on disc, the definitive version of Mass Effect. They left the multiplayer out, which I love multiplayer in Mass Effect 3, but they left it out and said, like, this is your game. Here it is to keep. It has been preserved in its best form, in my opinion. So that type of stuff is what I'm here for, man. I'm here to fight for keeping games around, not just as a rental where it becomes a thing of the past. Again, I know multiplayer is a gray area, but with our single player games disappearing, it starts to get a little frustrating. Now, there are other examples outside of Metal Gear Solid where games have just disappeared, been delisted, and have yet to come back. One of those games, like I mentioned, isn't a great one, but it's Jump Force. Jump Force just is no longer for sale. And this one shocks me again because I know there's the online hub, but there is a single player component and it is a fighting video game. And they're like, yeah, we're just not selling it anymore. The idea that games are created, millions of dollars are sank into them, and once the business window is over, they just don't see a point in selling it anymore, to the point where they won't even provide it and make it available for sale. Now, I know Jump Force for many may be a trash example because a lot of people think Jump Force is terrible. I agree with you all, but it's the fact that they aren't even going to sell it or make it available that will one day make this, yes, believe it or not, a somewhat rare game, as less copies are printed, less copies are available. You know how it goes. And so what happens in these instances is we turn to the major publishers, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, for answers to backwards compatibility, making these old games accessible, trying to get it where we can preserve these copies of games. And you get things like the C-bomb, which was resolved. You get things like DRM checking on Xbox, which is unresolved and is still a big thorn in the platform side because you couldn't play the games offline until you do an online DRM check. This is problematic. I've already talked about that separately. So we turn to them for answers, and the response we get are things like Nintendo Switch Online, which is a subscription service that effectively replaces Virtual Console, one of the best game preservation platforms, that says, hey, any of those old Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Color games, GameCube, Wii, etc., like, they're all here just for sale in this marketplace. Buy them, enjoy them in their original format. But now, in the day and age of subscription services, we are now being drip fed games that have probably been ready for years to go. They need to keep recurrent content. So what we're now facing is the monetization of backwards compatibility. That to me is one of the most egregious things ever, especially when you look at what Nintendo's doing with the 3DS store. Oh, we're going to take it down. The Switch is big anyway, right? Because what they're trying to do is strip options away from you, so you move right up the avenue into the Nintendo Switch online subscription program, where when they inevitably start adding more and more platforms to that service, whoa, oh my God, I'm going to go sign up instead of going back and playing games individually on the 3DS. It's become more and more of an aggressive business model. And I do understand the idea that these companies have to answer to shareholders, and they have to do things right by them to make them a profitable company. And that's why subscription services are great for these companies, because it's just like guaranteed money month in, month out without having to release something. And games do take years to make. So I understand the notion here. But then you also look at PlayStation, who had a pretty good answer, I would say. Yes, there are games within the PlayStation Classics of the actual subscription service, but they're making those games in the most part available for sale separately. I would say that's a pretty good answer, but then you have someone like Nintendo doing the opposite, and in fact, artificially inflating their games with Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which was a game collection people were really looking forward to. That was such a lazy effort, and then they take it off the marketplace afterwards, like this mind-boggling decision-making that I just can't wrap my head around. And why are all these decisions made? Why is gaming becoming more and more of a cutthroat business practice when it began as such a creatively fueled industry? Well, the answer is a little more complex. Gaming, as it's grown as a business model, also grows as an investment. We've heard time in, time out from numerous figures in our industry that games are becoming more expensive to make. As games become more expensive to make and as you reach for a broader audience, the risk in turn grows like any business investment. Gaming being one of the greatest risks, because you could have a great game sitting right there that can just be completely overlooked, not talked about, because you're in the middle of the zeitgeist of some random indie game popping off and taking over the internet. It can just happen like that. There's a lot of chance, there's a lot of luck in it. So gaming, like any creative endeavor, is a huge risk. But as that risk grows, companies look for ways to mitigate that risk. And these are options you see, like forcing you into the new things, forcing you into the subscription services, really controlling the creative process of these developers, trying to make AAA games as accessible as possible, where, as an example, and I know people are going to think because I do a lot of Xbox coverage, I'm just attacking Sony here. I'm not, but I was playing Miles Morales. I finally caught up, played that game, beat it. And what I noticed as someone diving into my first Sony AAA game in a hot minute, probably since Ratchet and Clank, is the amount of like audio cues placed throughout games just to let you know where to go. And it feels like more of a guided adventure and someone holding your hands than actually just discovering things on your own and exploring the world that someone's built for you. And again, these are all things to mitigate disaster, mitigate frustration, maximize profits, make it easy to recommend, easy to pick up, so on and so forth. And obviously it goes deeper than that. We talked about backwards compatibility. It goes into game design. And overall, to me, I think it makes gaming a worse place. That said, I will provide one sole counter argument to everything I've said in this video. Game prices are going up. With inflation in our economy, they're going up to $70. It's been pretty consistently there for some time now. And I will say that these subscription services do offer an opportunity to afford these games for people who maybe don't have enough money. And you could, for example, sign up for Game Pass the month that Starfield comes out, play it that month if it works for your financial situation, and then hop off of the subscription service until you're ready to either purchase it for yourself or renew your subscription and continue your playthrough. The option of how you consume the content is great nowadays, and that is something I will not disregard in this argument. Again, I know a lot of people are going to see the title and go, oh, what about Game Pass and all that stuff? Yes, I'm a huge advocate of Game Pass. I'm a huge advocate of having these games be available to people en masse, as someone who grew up with no money at all. Trust me, I'm one of the biggest advocates of Game Pass because I would have killed to have a service that's dropping brand new games day one available to you as a part of your $15 a month subscription service. There are benefits to the modern age of gaming. Being able to access your games on your phone, the cloud sharing of saves, cross-play, all of this stuff is awesome. These two things can exist at once though. There can be a lot of reasons why gaming is getting better, although I think that list is a lot shorter than why gaming is getting worse. So that's all I have to say. Take great care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.